would dedicate my lecture today, which is on an aspect that I believe is fundamental to the well-being of the legal profession, the ascendancy of the Supreme Court, to his memory. The Constitution had brought into existence the three separate and independent organs of state, equal and coordinate, and one with the other. Today, it is a public perception that the higher judiciary in the country occupies a position of preeminence among these three organs of the state, and not attained by any other judiciary in any other part of the world. It is, however, intriguing that the founding fathers had a deep suspicion that they were creating something akin to a monster which would turn on its creator being the Constituent Assembly and later the Parliament itself. During the deliberations of the Constituent Assembly, Sri T.T. Krishnamachari expressed dark forebodings. He said, I don't know whether any of you have come across this when reading the constitutional debates. He said it might be that to give the judiciary an enormous amount of power, a judiciary which may not be controlled by any legislature in any manner except by the means of ultimate removal, we may perhaps be creating a Frankenstein monster which could nullify the intentions of the framers of the Constitution. He says, I have in mind the different set of experience in another country, and that is the United States. Sir Aladi Krishnaswamy Iyer, too, struck an ominous note when he said, the doctrine of independence is not to be raised to the level of a dogma so as to enable the judiciary to function as a kind of superior legislature or a superior executive. B.N. Rao, constitutional advisors, also had his doubts about arming the Supreme Court with such vast powers. His warning to the Constituent Assembly was in the following words: the courts, manned by an irremovable judiciary, not so sensitive to public needs in the social or economic sphere as the representatives of a periodically elected legislature, will in effect have a veto on legislation exercisable at any time and at the instance of any litigant. The early years of the Supreme Court, as is well known, were years of conflict, and very many judgments, particularly on land reforms, were struck down by Parliament and had to be neutralized by Parliament by amending the Constitution. So much so, Justice Hidayatullah pointed out in Golaknath's case in 1967, two Supreme Court reports, 7621. In our country, amendments have so far been made only with the object of negativing the Supreme Court decisions. Now, I would like all of you to pause and think. Are these persons, among the founding fathers, are they justified at all in such a fears being expressed? One. Number two, have these fears materialized? Now, if you look carefully at it, you will find very many areas where the Supreme Court, according to me, has turned real provisions of the Constitution for its own exercising powers, which the founding fathers never intended to give to the judges of the Supreme Court or even of the High Courts. Take, for example, the appointment of judges of the High Court and Supreme Court. The Article 124 of the Constitution said that the President may appoint judges for the higher judiciary in consultation with the Chief Justice and other judges of the Supreme Court of India. What is it that has happened? First, by a judgment, they said that this word consultation should be treated as concurrence. That is not justified. For the simple reason, if you go through the debates, you will find this very suggestion was put to an amendment which has moved, saying why consultation, why not we have concurrence, so that you may not go over the heads of the judiciary. But so far as the Dr. Ambedkar is concerned, he replied by saying, we cannot have this because one single person may do great damage to the institution. You have to remember that so far as judges are concerned, they do not have a constituency. They have only the knowledge they have acquired, which may be that they are acquired while practicing while listening to cases in the High Court and then in the Supreme Court. The result of that is they are governed by their own background, which may be perhaps we say that judge is left of the center, and some judges are central, some judges are right of center, and we know in advance before arguing a case whether, so far as the judge is concerned, he is likely to decide in favor of labor or in favor of industry, and so on. Now, this is unlike the legislators. So far as they are concerned, they have a constituency. So far as they are concerned, a law is passed only after referring it to the select committee or after a full debate. I mean, not forget what has been happening in recent years. A full debate in Parliament, and amendments are moved, corrections made, or a select committee is appointed, and so on. You don't have all that when the matters are being discussed. And mind you, the Supreme Court of India sits in divisions, just like the High Court. And there are 30 judges and perhaps 13 divisions. So if it comes before one court, you get this judgment. If the same case goes before some other judge, you may get a different judgment because, as somebody said, they are not like slot machines where you put in your this and pull the lever and the same result comes forward of whatever it is. It is not possible. And therefore, in those circumstances, you will find the judges going far and wide in regard to the decisions on cases. One judge says, if the government of India passes a law and says you cannot have liquor vents along the national highways, the court says no. Why along the highways? Why not have it 500 meters away? And 500 meters away means that there are very many hotels which would be excluded because they also extended the law to not merely national highways, but also to highways passing through towns and cities. What does this mean? Most of the big hotels would be established on that. Tourists come in, they from different countries, they want a drink, and they're tired, exhausted, they land up in the night. But that's not possible because you are really providing for total prohibition in vast sections of the country. But when this was all brought to their notice, they changed it, made it 100 meters. 100 meters, 500 meters would make no difference. Look recently at what has been happening in relation to the pandemic itself. Various orders are being passed. And question is, so far as government is concerned, they find it very difficult if their well-considered decisions are turned down. Of course, I'm not speaking as Attorney General, take it from me, but only as a senior advocate who has been watching what has been happening. And let me tell you, somebody mentioned I have put in 50 years of experience. I have put in 67 years because I was enrolled on the 16th of January in 1954. And calculating from January 1954, it will be 67 years. But it makes no difference whatsoever whether it is 50 years or 67 years or 67 years. Now, what I find is that so far as the big cases are concerned, my father was a lead counsel in the Golaknath case. Golaknath judgment was a major blow to parliamentary supremacy. Now, my father, the late Sri M. K. Nambiar, had led the arguments in the case. He had preferred the theory. He started the theory of basic structure in that case. That is referred to by two of the judges. And that was based on an article written by a German jurist, Dieter Conrad. And he read the entire article to the court so that they may know that it was his thoughts which he was putting over as best as he could. The amendments to the Constitution had no higher status than that of any other law made by Parliament, and to the extent that they encroach on fundamental rights would have to be declared void by reason of Article 13 of the Constitution. That's what Golaknath said. Considering that the result of the judgment would be to invalidate all the past amendments to the Constitution, they evolved the principle of prospective overruling. With this, the lines of confrontation were clearly drawn. Parliament had no other alternative than to neutralize the Golaknath judgment. Article 368 and Article 13 were amended. It was then that the matter was again taken up, and the validity of the 24th Amendment to the Constitution was discussed in the Keshavan and the Bharati case. And mind you, so far as our famous Parsi senior lawyer is concerned, he argued brilliantly and put over Nani Palkiwala, put over the case that there is some unwritten rules by which a constitution had to be limited to its four corners. Otherwise, you could convert a democracy into an autocratic government. The parliament could exercise the power of extending the length, the tenure of parliament from 5 years to each, is from 5 years to 10 years, 12 years. It could postpone elections from 5 years to 15 years, so that the members of parliament who were elected could entrench themselves in power and could pass arbitrary laws. All this would be the result unless there was some unwritten limitations on the powers which Parliament could exercise. And that was how the basic structure theory came into existence. Now, of course, it had its repercussions. Chief Justice Sikri delivered the judgment and retired the next year. But three of our very eminent judges, including Justice K.S. Hegde and Shalat and one more judge, all of them had to be superseded. They should have become senior Chief Justice of India. They were deprived of that. And the result was that, so far as the end is concerned, he became the Chief Justice. But so far as the executive is concerned and the political wing of the state, they were not happy. And Mohan Kumar Mangalam, the then Minister of Steel, in a monograph on judicial appointments, had this to say, dealing with the period after 1967. He said the experience of the last 6 years, an unfortunate period where a virtual confrontation was taking place between the judiciary and parliament of confusion and uncertainty in the law. It has to be understood and correct conclusions drawn from it. He extracted a speech of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru at the time the constitution was framed, and he said, no Supreme Court and no judiciary can stand in judgment over the sovereign will of Parliament, representing the will of the entire community. If you go wrong here and there, He can point it out. But in the ultimate analysis, where the future of the community is concerned, no judiciary can come in the way. Therefore, if such a thing occurs, they should draw attention to that fact. But it is obvious that no court, no system of judiciary can function in the nature of a third house, as a kind of third house of correction. So it is important that with this limitation, the judiciary should function. But we have a union minister who, during the height of emergency, on the 28th October 1976, made a frontal attack on the Supreme Court of India and quoted, as it were, without acknowledging Franklin D. Roosevelt and an address to the nation when he had to pack the court, when he threatened to pack the Supreme Court of the United States, because the social legislation which he was passing one by one was struck down by the Supreme Court of the United States. An atmosphere of confrontation was sought to be created by those whose duty it was to see that they did not encroach upon the field which did not legitimately belong to them. Nothing should be left undone now to ensure that such a situation did not recur. If even after the amendment, that is the 42nd Amendment to the Constitution, confrontation continues, then I think it will be a sad day for the judiciary. And again, we are trying to save them, that is the judiciary, from the temptation to intrude into powers which do not belong to them. What we are doing today is not to save the people from the judges, but really enabling the judges to save them from themselves. Now it's a part of history that the emergency was declared, the constitution was, the fundamental rights were put in suspension, and the judiciary was afraid of what would happen to them. But today we have a very strong judiciary which is not concerned with what the government thinks or the government feels. It acts on its own. It passes judgments which include, if you take any one of its recent judgments and so on, into areas which are prohibited to it, which are in the area of executive power, even in the nature of legislation. They tell it may be the law officers, look, this is not correct. I think we should pass a law like to this effect. And they tell that Parliament should pass a law, and what law it should pass. Clearly, that would be impeding or infringing the powers with the judiciary, with the Parliament possesses. Recently, I think the government decided that they would not implement the judgment as it stands. In the case of the integration of the tribunals, so far as the court is concerned, they said it was something which is, according to me, not very important. The finance bill said, and the rules made thereunder of 2017, that the tenure of the tribunals, and there were 19 tribunals, and each one had so many judges, that they would have only for 4 years or 4 years tenure, but it could be reappointed. The court said no, not 4 years, but 5 years. They struck down 4 years and said it will be 5 years. Now, the government then passed an ordinance by which they reiterated in the teeth of the judgment, notwithstanding any judgment of the courts, the tenure will be 4 years, and they had said that advocates with 10 years experience should be appointed as members. Now, a graduate lawyer will be about 23 years old. 10 years will make it 33 years old. Now, what will be the effect of it? It means that so far as the judge is concerned, it says that a High Court judge will be appointed with 10 years experience. But in fact, there are unwritten rules by which, unless they are 45 and above, they will not be appointed, which means 23 to 45, which means about 22 years or so of experience. Therefore, government didn't accept it. They said all members will have only 50 years of experience. Now, as a result of which, so far as this is concerned, they did not implement the judgment. But they said, notwithstanding any judgment, it will be 4 years. Notwithstanding any judgment, it will be 50 years for all, which means that no 10 years. Now, again, this was struck down by the courts, and as a result of which, again, a law has been passed now. And the law says the bill has been passed by the lower house, by the Lok Sabha, and there they have reiterated 4 years instead of 5 years, 50 years, as it was before it was struck down. Now, this means that at a certain stage, even Parliament will start wondering, are we not having any powers whatsoever, or the Parliament will there be, or the judiciary will there be interfering with it to this extent?